Thank you so much. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm really happy to be with you all at this event organized by the UN Network on Migration. This high-level political forum has laid out in clear terms the challenges in achieving sustainable development, in particular the COVID-19 pandemic, impacts of ongoing conflict, and the climate crisis. We've heard the call to build back better through inclusive partnerships, strengthen multilateralism, and global solidarity. Human mobility is a mega trend of the 21st century, which contributes to the achievement of the SDGs. And throughout the pandemic, we've seen the critical role that safe, orderly, and regular migration plays in fostering healthy, prosperous communities. So this point was made loud and clear at the first International Migration Review Forum, or IMRF, on the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, held in New York in May. Participants at the IMRF delivered a really resounding message. We will not achieve equitable recovery from COVID-19, nor the SDGs, without attaining safe, orderly, and regular migration through enhanced international cooperation. Global challenges require global partnerships, and both the IMRF and the HLPF provide us with platforms for partnership strengthening. Both the SDGs and the GCM are grounded in a people-centered approach, one which aims to ensure that no one is to be left behind. The pandemic heightened our awareness of the need for this approach. No one is safe until everyone is safe. And indeed, the SDGs under review this year at the HLPF demonstrate how development gaps and deficiencies can impact people on the move, their families, and their communities. At the same time, they show how well-governed migration can accelerate progress towards the achievement of sustainable development. So I just want to spend a little time on some of the SDGs covered under the HLPF this year. So on SDG 4, roughly 1 in 70 children live in a country different from their birthplace. But for many, their rights remain unfulfilled. Globally, 6 million students are studying abroad, and this number is expected to rise to 8 million by 2025. Improving and expanding education for child and adult migrants, including in building skills, is a strategic long-term investment. It will improve migrants' health, income, integration, and preparedness for the future of work, and can help societies recover better from COVID-19 and ensure that SDG 4 targets are achieved. On SDG 5, migrant women continue to be disproportionately affected by discrimination, gender-based violence, and harassment at work and at home, and wage theft. This was highlighted by COVID-19. Women, including women migrant workers, constitute over 70% of global frontline health and social care workers, and are more likely to be working on the front lines in hospitals, care facilities, and private homes. Many of these women work in precarious conditions or with irregular migration status and face risks as a result of this. Promoting gender equality and the empowerment of migrant women and girls means recognizing their leadership. We are also missing the chance to make better decisions on migration governance by having gender-responsive migration policies. All of these considerations are crucial to attaining the achievement of SDG 5 and will have a cascading effect on many other SDGs. Now, skipping to SDG 17. This calls for improving migration data and increasing disaggregation of data by migratory status. Implementing Objective 1 of the Global Compact on Migration helps action this call, ensuring that accurate disaggregated data provides a basis for evidence-based policies and discourse related to migration. Without this data, we cannot understand the needs, gaps, and potential of migration governance for sustainable development to the fullest. Diaspora and migrant associations are key partners to promote inclusive sustainable development, and businesses and trade unions are critical partners helping to support equitable treatment of migrant workers and shared prosperity. The resourcefulness of migrants meant that remittances remained resilient through the pandemic and have continued an upward trajectory. Migrant contributions, economic and otherwise, provide vital lifelines to families and contribute to the sustainable development of the communities where they live. Now, the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund, mandated by the Global Compact, is founded on partnership. To date, 13 joint programs have been financed, bringing together numerous UN entities along with government and stakeholder partners to tackle a range of issues related to migration sustainable development. This includes tackling xenophobia and discrimination, supporting families left behind, and strengthening adaptation measures to better deal with the impacts of climate change. Many other partnerships exist to maximize the sustainable development outcomes of good migration governance. The EU-UN Migration Capacity Building Partnership is supporting countries to achieve safe, orderly, and regular migration through partnerships between the government, the EU, and the UN at national and local level. The adoption by consensus of the Progress Declaration means that the Global Compact is now firmly entrenched in our collective action to facilitate safe, orderly, and regular migration. Today is the first opportunity to come together to discuss how to move forward on the commitments outlined in the Progress Declaration and in fulfillment of the SDGs. We can start actioning these commitments, including by leveraging our collective knowledge and expertise to discuss a limited, I emphasize limited, set of indicators which the Secretary General put forward for consideration, which the Secretary General could put forward for consideration by member states in his next biennial report. We must build on the strong partnerships we developed across the network, across UN entities, and with a broad range of stakeholders. I look forward to our exchange, to share experiences, to hear your thoughts, and to identify concrete actions moving forward to strengthen the linkages between the Global Compact on Migration and the 2030 Agenda. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion ahead.
Thank you. I am Deputy Director General Ugochi Daniels. Dear Ugo, thank you for your introductory remarks. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the adoption of the Progress Declaration at the first International Migration Review Forum was another milestone in our decades-long quest to create a world in which all migratory movements are safe, orderly, and regular, and where no one needs to resort to migration to enjoy a life of dignity. The declaration imagines a world that not only emphasizes and addresses the challenges associated with migration, but also recognizes the many contributions of migrants and the assets that migrants bring with them. My name is Maria Francesca Spatolisano. I am the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Most people call me Francesca or ASG Francesca. Don't worry, the name is too long anyway. And it is my pleasure to be your moderator today. Before introducing the panelists, allow me to congratulate Ambassador Oliver Mas from Luxembourg, who joins us today for this side event, and Ambassador Rabab Fatima from Bangladesh. As many of you know, These two ambassadors skillfully and successfully facilitated the negotiations on the Progress Declaration for the first International Migration Review Forum. UNDESA, my department, was very pleased to support the negotiations on the Progress Declaration in cooperation, of course, with other members of the UN Network on Migration, and in particular, the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. I am especially gratified that the declaration not only reiterates, but also strengthens the linkages between the 2030 Agenda and for Sustainable Development and the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, and also includes an invitation to ECOSOC and its subsidiary bodies to contribute to the review of the Global Compact. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our topic today. We have indeed a packed program. First, we will hear from 4 distinguished panelists, and I will introduce them and ask each of them 1 or more questions, and each panelist will have about 5 minutes to make their presentations. The second part of this event will be an interactive dialogue. And I encourage all the participants today to listen carefully to the presentations so that you can then pose concrete questions or raise key issues for discussion. And if you wish to take the floor, you know that, but we always repeat during the second segment, raise your electronic hand or ask for the floor in the chat box, including your name and the organization you represent, please. So let us now move to our first speaker, Ambassador Oliver Maas, from your vantage point. I think you are with us, right, Ambassador? Yes. From your vantage point as a co-facilitator of the Progress Declaration, what role does the Global Compact play in achieving the SDGs and vice versa? And how can we bring these two frameworks closer together at the UN? Ambassador, you have the floor. Please unmute yourself and
thank you very much.
Molto
grazie, Assistant Secretary General Spatolisano, dear Francesca. Thank you also to Deputy Director General Daniels, dear Ugochi, for your opening remarks. Dear colleagues, my name is Olivier Maes. I've already been presented. I'm the permanent representative of Luxembourg to the United Nations, and it really gives me great pleasure to address you today on a topic that has grown particularly dear to me over the past few months. As has been said, together with the permanent representative of Bangladesh, Ambassador Fatima, I had the great honor to co-facilitate the intergovernmental consultations on the Progress Declaration of the first International Migration Review Forum, which was adopted by consensus on the 20th of May. The consensual adoption of the Progress Declaration marks an important turning point in the context of international migration, because for the first time since the adoption of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, the international community was able to come together to agree on a document that addresses all aspects of migration, all while recognizing the inextricable link between the implementation of the Global Compact on migration and the 2030 agenda that is at the heart of this week's high-level political forum. This recognition has far-reaching implications. It means that without safe, orderly and regular migration, there can be no sustainable development. And it means that without upholding the human rights of all migrants, regardless of their migration status, we will effectively fail in our common goal to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals within the next 8 years. To that end, the Progress Declaration recognizes the role of migrants as agents of sustainable development. But it goes even further by interlinking the implementation, the follow-up and the review of the Global Compact on migration with the achievement of the 2030 agenda as a whole. And Francesca, you already alluded to it. The Progress Declaration calls for strengthening the linkages between the respective review forums of the Global Compact and the 2030 agenda. And it also encourages the relevant subsidiary bodies of the General Assembly, that can be, for example, also the Human Rights Council, and of the Economic and Social Council to contribute to the review of the implementation of the Global Compact. And this is particularly pertinent in the context of the high-level political forum, because the Progress Declaration equally calls on member states to give due consideration to the progress they have made and the challenges they have encountered in implementing the Global Compact in their voluntary national reviews. And I believe that is something that a number of member states have already done, as will be explained by my dear colleague, Ambassador Griselda Lopez of El Salvador. Please allow me also to add a few words here in my national capacity. That earlier today, Luxembourg presented its voluntary national review in the high-level political forum. And in the report that was published for that review, we also reflected on the implementation by Luxembourg of the Global Compact for migration. However, a key to determining if we have truly made progress in implementing the Global Compact is the ability to measure. It is data, as was underlined by Deputy Director General Daniels in her opening remarks. That is why it is all the more important that the Progress Declaration we have adopted requests the Secretary General to propose a limited set of indicators, drawing on the SDG indicator framework, to support member states in their reviews of progress in implementing the Global Compact. Dear colleagues, the Progress Declaration provides a roadmap to guide our collective efforts over the next years as member states, but also as local governments, as civil society and private sector representative, and most importantly, also as migrants, to implement the Global Compact for safe, orderly and regular migration, and thereby enable us to achieve the 2030 agenda. I really greatly look forward to the discussion today, which is the first after the adoption of the Progress Declaration. I also look forward to the online discussion space being used that has been created for this event. And in the interest of all of us, let us work together to create safe, orderly and regular migration for everyone, everywhere. And you can count on the continued commitment of Luxembourg in that respect. I thank you very much, and I hand the floor back to you, Madam Moderator, dear Francesca.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you, Olivier. This was a very important opening statement. I know you have to leave, so feel free whenever the time comes. But thank you for sharing these remarks, focusing on the human rights aspect, regardless of status, on the role of migrants as agents of sustainable development, which brings the two agendas together, and many other very important elements. Now I would like to go to our second panelist, who is Ambassador Griselda Lopez, the permanent representative of El Salvador to the United Nations in New York, and ask you a question, Madam Ambassador, about indeed the VNRs. How has El Salvador integrated migration and the Global Compact into its voluntary national review this year? And what lessons have you learned, and what suggestions you have to better align reporting of the Global Compact and the 2030 agenda? Madam Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so
are.
much. Thank you so much, ASG Francesca, for giving me the floor. And I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the United Nations Network on Migration for inviting my country, El Salvador, to participate in this important event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, with the purpose to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the government of El Salvador created in the 2020 the National Council for Sustainable Development, the CNDS, which is comprised by diverse national institutions. And just to mention a few, the Ministry of Education, the National Institution of Women, the Ministry of Environment for local development as well, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, among others. And this initiative is being led by the Vice President of El Salvador. So as you can see, leading the implementation of the SDGs and its follow-up comes from the highest level of the government. And we presented our second BNR just 2 days ago. And for this aim, and prior to the process of the elaboration of the BNR report, our government prioritized 10 crucial goals for the national development. We're talking about SDG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 13, 16, and 17. Additionally, we have thematic alignment of national sectoral priorities with the SDGs. And these have been included in different initiatives, such as the National Policy on Early Childhood, that is named Grow Together, the Social Development Plan, the Agricultural Rescue Plan, the National Tourism Plan as well, El Salvador's contribution on the climate change reporting, and also in the Territorial Control Plan, just to mention some of them. What I wanted to portray here is that migration, it's a cross-cutting issue that is considered in national, different national programs and policies. And these programs cover a wide range of subjects that goes from children, agriculture, security. So migration is part of all these initiatives. When we're talking, that was just like the introduction to talk about our BNR reporting. We had a participatory methodology that was carried out in which entities from civil society, academia, the private sector, but also development cooperation partners, and obviously national development or national institutions were consulted by the NCNDS. 9 workshops were organized with different stakeholders to hear their views on the implementation of the SDGs. El Salvador present also a report on the status of the implementation of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration within the framework of the preparations of the IMRF, which had as a main objective to strengthen government institutions for the appropriation of this Global Compact of Migration, but also to identify the main advances and challenges in this implementation. This report, we're talking about the report that we present in the IMRF, serve as an important input for our BNR report and focus on the priority of the SDGs to address the key drivers for irregular migration in our country. So besides our report to the IMRF, as I mentioned, to be a relevant and crucial input for the BNR, this was also a reminder of the value of aligning the GCM reporting with the SDG reporting. But also, if you allow me, ASG Francesca, it's important to highlight something. You can have a lot of priorities, plans, programs, but if you don't have funding, you cannot implement them. You cannot make them a reality. And that's what it was so important that El Salvador allocate around 3.4 billion of our own resources for the areas of education, health, security, agriculture, in order to prioritize the approach of human mobility, but also to reduce the vulnerabilities and to this adverse risk for irregular migration. As expressed by our Vice President, Felix Ulloa, during the presentation of the BNR, through the Territorial Control Plan, the government is addressing one of the most important concerns of the Salvadorian population, which is security. That is also one of the main drivers of migration. With this plan, the government is combating these criminal structures in different communities of the country that for many years terrorize our own people. And this is important, Francesca and dear friends, because without security, it's impossible to move forward in the implementation of the SDGs. But also what we're looking for is to prevent that people migrate because of violence, because of they are in fear of living in their own communities. And in this sense, what we also are focusing a lot, it's in preventing violence and this important focus on youth. So we have also implemented the Urban Welfare Opportunity Centers, the acronym is CUVO in Spanish, in those municipalities and communities that have the highest index of socioeconomic vulnerability. So dear friends, let me mention now some of the lessons learned from integrating the GCM into our BNR. First, with the integration of the GCM objectives into our BNR report, we advance in our commitment to achieve the SDG 1047 to facilitate safe, orderly, and regular migration. Second, government institutions have taken ownership of the implementation of the GCM objectives in line with the SDGs in different thematic areas as a mechanism to address the structural drivers of irregular migration. But as I mentioned at the beginning of my intervention, this has been incorporated in different priorities and programs, policies developed by our government. So migration is not seen also as part of the GCM reporting or as part of or an isolated objective of the government. It has been a cross-cutting issue that has been incorporated in different programs and taken by different institutions as well. And in this sense, as a third point, this synergy has made also possible to identify the main advances, but also challenges in the implementation of the GCM and address them through the appropriate programs and strategies. So to conclude, dear friends, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration is grounded in the 2030 Agenda. With the SDG implementation lagging, a global pandemic that has further threatened the achievement of the SDGs, the BNR is therefore an important opportunity for the governments, not only to make the assessments of the implementation of the different goals and targets, but also to make renewed statements and commitments. In this sense, and what we're talking in these important events, it's about the value of migration. But also, let's not forget that we're talking about people, we're talking about migrants and their contribution that they make to the development. And for that aim, we need to include in our national infrastructure that is in charge of the implementation of the SDGs, the GCM as an integral part of our national processes. Assessing progress as well in achieving a just and transformative sustainable development that really leaves no one behind. The BNR reporting process of El Salvador in this sense is an example between that synergy between GCM and the SDGs. And we're ready to learn, to share our good practices, but also to hear from others about these important synergies and connections that should have between the SDGs and the BNR and the GCM as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I appreciate, the point you made in the very beginning, leadership from the top, but then you ended security for the people. And between these two, there is the whole work you're doing, and it is so important indeed to connect, preventing violence, making people life decent and in dignity so that they can stay and then they can thrive through the SDGs and the resources you have allocated are quite impressive. Thank you for this intervention. I will turn now to our third guest that I see is with us already, is Mr. Raouda Jouani, the Director of Poverty, Social Policy and Migration in the Ministry of Economy and Planning of Tunisia. Madame, you have the floor. Please unmute yourself. No. Maybe you should try to disconnect and reconnect. And in the meanwhile, we may invert the order and ask another panelist while you go through this technique. Ah, there,
Okay.
we hear
Thank
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting my country to contribute in this interesting event. I'm really honored, and it's my pleasure to participate with you in this important event. To say this opportunity to talk about Tunisian experience in terms of migration. As you know, for decades, Tunisia has given importance for Tunisian abroad, okay? But since the Tunisian revolution, since 2011, the approach became more holistic and global. And already we are talking about migration and Tunisian abroad, okay? And in our national plans, we integrate migration and Tunisian abroad as a part and as an important part in the plan. Okay, so this thematic was integrated in our 5-year plan, 2016 and 2020, our 5-year plan, and it is and now we are currently in the process of our national planning, a 3-year plan, which covered the period 2023 and 2025. The guidelines of this plan are inspired by the Tunisian Vision 2035. Okay, and this process takes place within the framework of a participatory approach, and it's done in 2 levels. First level, which is the central level or the national level, and we have the sectoral commission, where we find various lead of ministries with the involvement of all stakeholders and all partners. And at regional, and when we said in Tunisia regional level, we mean by this local level, okay? And at the local level, we have regional commissions or local commissions with the regional council as a lead, with the involvement, of course, of different stakeholders and partners. And in this plan, we dedicate a commission which is named Migration and Tunisian Abroad. And that, of course, reflects the importance that Tunisia accords to the theme of migration and Tunisian abroad. And the work of these commissions, of course, it began by the monitoring and the evaluation of the past period, the issues identified, and the strategies for and orientation for the next period. Of course, and remind you, and I remind you that in the framework of international cooperation, Tunisia has carried out in 2014 the mainstreaming migration project with the support of Swiss cooperation and the IOM. And it was a very, very important project which deals with how to implement migration in national plans and national planning. Of course, at the international level, and as a part of its international commitment, Tunisia have, of course, like all countries, have joined the 2030 agenda with its 17 SDGs. And of course, as we know all, there's no goal dedicated to migration, but unfortunately, you know, but there is target which deals with migration, especially in the SDGs 8 and SDGs 10. So I want to highlight here that Tunisia have done 2 VNR in 2019 and 2021. And especially our VNR report in 2021 has highlighted the theme of migration very well, and it was treated more and deeply than the report of the previous report, you know, because we are in progress how to integrate and how migration have to be as like our colleague said, it's a thematic which across all policies. Look, we can't deal migration and treat migration as a single term. Or no, we have to deal it and we have to integrate it in all policies, even how to prevent from, have to guarantee security and prevent people from vulnerability and poverty and analphabetism, illiteracy. So all these are related. That's why we have to integrate migration in national plans. And of course, the link between GCM and SDGs, we can't separate any agenda because they are closely related, and each one reflects the others. That's why to implement SDGs, we have to take in account how to implement and how to execute the GCM. They are closely related, and we have to emphasize on the synergy between GCM and SDGs. And as good practices, I want to highlight here that this in the framework of the program TAM, which program deals with, which as a regional program support partners institutions in North Africa to draft and implement policies and mechanisms for safe, orderly, and regular migration. In the framework of this program, a diagnostic on the progress of worker recruitment in Tunisia have been guided by Tunisian local Tunisian workers and the ILO, and among the recommendation of this diagnostic, one of this recommendation called for legislative reform. A tripartite committee was convened by the ILO to consider the reform and submitted in 2019 the law on the organization of the exercise of the activities of placement of Tunisian abroad by private agencies. And this law is not approved yet, but it is ongoing. And this law can allow the ability and the state's authority to deliver sanctions to recruitment agency that don't comply with defined operational and procedural standards. As a measure to protect Tunisian migrants abroad. This is considered as a good practice in Tunisia. But here I want to highlight that in Tunisia here we consider migration as a term which is we can find it in every policy, from children to senior person. We have to take into account that migration have to be excuse my English, because something I just manage in English. It would be easier for me to speak in French, but I try
you are
to
doing fine. You're doing fine. Thank you for the effort.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So do you want to add something?
No, thank you. I think this is all, and we'll discuss together after in this.
Yes, there will be an interactive part, and we can, answer the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate this plan you have, and the optic of putting together the migration and the concept of the Tunisian abroad. It's very important, of course, and to integrate the implementation of the SDGs and the Global Compact principles through legislation, which is very important, and compliance. So thank you very much for this presentation. I would like now to go to our fourth and last speaker in this first part of the event, and she is Ms. Paddy Sianga Knudsen, the Vice President for Global Research Forum and Diaspora and Transnationalism. Can I ask you the question to tell us how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the contributions of migrants and diaspora communities to sustainable development, both in countries of origin and destination? And how can countries maximize these contributions in their recovery efforts? And finally, how can we better monitor these contributions at the global level? Ms. Paddy Sianga-Knudsen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ASG Francesca, for those questions, and good evening, good afternoon, DDG Ugochi, Daniels, Your Excellencies, Ambassador Lopez, Ambassador Olivier, Director Yowani, and I also realize that we have quite a number of dignitaries that are joining us, and simply, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's a good time to have this discussion post the IMRF. I think there had been a lot of discussions around what the pandemic had sort of, what did it really impact? How did it really shape lives of migrants and diaspora? And we're coming at a time where we've had quite a number of effects. I think that, there's a lot of different studies that we see out there that are either led by diaspora organizations, migrant organizations, the international community, bilateral partners. And I think we're all pointing down to various things that we're probably not good planners. And I think that goes all the way from the global governance space, but I think all the way down to what the local space looks like. We don't engage enough, and we were not quite prepared for the kind of crisis that we had. So I think reflecting back on such a question at this time remains very important. And I was just thinking a bit more about, these phases that we saw out of the pandemic. I mean, the ripple effects that you saw on economies, on health systems, on mobility. And of course, we've seen that demonstrated in terms of how it impacted migrants, diaspora communities, their families. And this is talking about both in hosts and homelands. But beyond this, we know that in real terms, it's clear that jobs, lives, and savings were heavily affected. We know that naturally this means that the contribution that migrants and diaspora would make in any kind of setting would have to naturally be affected, because the main focus was also to save lives, and is to save lives everywhere. Migrants and diaspora were fighting for their own lives in many countries, but particularly in the beginning of that pandemic. So we saw ways that health systems had for migrants and diaspora, but we also saw what social protection systems looked like, quite close, quite limited. So I think some very important lessons that we've seen, but we also saw how migrant and diaspora sort of put up their muscle. And there we're talking about the material support that we saw, the human capacity and contributions that came out, whether it was, health and non-health professional diaspora groups, even some heading out home to help alleviate the crisis on the human resource side in public institutions, but also really to just help in many different ways. We've seen how contributions then naturally would be affected, right? Whether we're talking financially and non-financially. Remittances trends staggered, they weathered in some places. I think we had some hopes that, we had seen them actually going a little bit up and then they were coming down lower. You almost couldn't read these trends. And then I always say that you go down to personal remittance trends. What was really happening? Diaspora were holding back on investments because saving lives was important. But also it meant that, cushioning all these savings that went to financing various needs that were there in the homelands. But also remembering that a lot of migrants and diaspora would be in destinations that will probably not include them in social protection packages. So all that financing or all the, the extra savings that they would have would go to taking care of themselves as well. So I think on the remittances side, we saw those visible dips, and we also saw the new shapes that we had in the different graphs. And naturally, holding off investments also meant sometimes shifting support to critical areas, personal SDG investments, right? What did families really need out there? So I think, I thought that it would be much more interesting to bring this part of the discussion, seeing that, both ambassadors had touched on very, sort of very much this national-led initiatives or this global initiatives and where we look at them, but what are we really seeing on the ground? And then therefore, what can we say we have learned? I think we've learned both from the pandemic, and we've seen that demonstrated in the IMRF and the Progress Declaration, that we need a vision, we need an inspiration from that global governance space that goes beyond just scratching the surface. What are the real issues we need to touch on enhanced social protection? How do we really unpack gender and migration related issues? We need to be much more conscious to who do we really want to take care of when we talk about who is vulnerable in these different spaces. And that goes all the way down to kind of really understanding what the trends speak like in a particular space, all the way down to cities, all the way down to where migrants and diaspora would be. I think we've also learned that one has to foster, we need a GCM that really does foster a reworking those national and local priorities, so that, countries don't go away from a GCM that, of course, we understand that it is non-binding, and this is probably one of the biggest issues that we have around the Global Compact, is that it's really about cherry picking, and, governments could really pick what they put in their prioritization plans. And then it doesn't have an accountability framework, even when it comes down all the way to the local level where it's being implemented, unless you have a sort of vibrant, or as we call them, champion countries. Then I have another point around champion countries, because I think a lot of what we see is champion moments. I'm very happy to lift out a gold standard, and we still see that it's the same gold standards that we have, and we don't really have silver, bronze, and other categories. But what we really need to be seeing is more champion initiatives, I think, across different spaces. I also think that one of the things we need to be looking at when we talk about reworking, really rethinking how we frame particular issues that are of concern in the global migration governance space, is things like systemic discrimination. It's great to have, sound policies. It's great for us to be able to see, even at continental level, where, countries really come together, for instance, within the European Union, to really go against and say, yes, we do have a moment in a particular space with a number of countries that want to fight discrimination. And you have policies that have been developed. But, as the theme for our panel today is, it's real actioning on commitments. It has to be seen in real lives. Can migrants feel the difference of the policies that are in effect in each of the different spaces? And we have, in terms of real terms, in terms of real lives, in terms of real crisis, as we have seen, for instance, with the crisis in Ukraine, and the double standards that we have seen come up, even with a very vibrant, very lucrative, very flashy, very best practice set standards towards eliminating discrimination. So I think it's really, as Ambassador has measured, what are we measuring here? What is really our measurements to see the change? I think we've also learned a lot about data. We've learned about good data, disaggregated data, the who, the why, the where, are people moving? But I think we also need something about a new approach to data. How about we just use what we have in the various state and non-state systems, instead of sort of having also this wish around this, gold standard data requirements that we're looking for. And sometimes some of this data could really be useful in tweaking or just helping, move one step up to sort of a gold standard or best practice as we see it. Because I think that there is so much quality data that is around in different spaces that could really be used in a much more efficient way, and that could really have a much more meaningful impact and help us to see the kind of transformation that the SDGs seek for, and also that the GCM objectives try to match out towards. I think we also need to think about those innovative initiatives that we're calling champion in nature. I think we have too many sort of regular moves that are being referred to as champion moments. So maybe being a little bit more bold in what we're calling, champion initiatives, and really having more champion initiatives, I think, spread across different countries. I think we cannot rely on champion moments to steer change. We've also, I think what is also very clear is that monitoring remains an issue. And, ASG, you asked the question around monitoring. We often say in the space of the non-state actor space, we have a GCM that doesn't have enough teeth to chew through global challenges. Now, we understand it's non-binding, but it's non-binding in the way that it can't even chew some of the very, palatable and mushed up challenges, no matter how we package them into these objectives. So how, what do we want to see forward? And I hope in this discussion we'll be able to unpack some of these things. And it's been very interesting to hear about this indicator framework, this limited set of indicators that has been proposed, but also can we see something through this SDG monitoring and reporting? And of course, there we need to be very methodical. Again, coming back to why do we monitor? Why do we measure? And how does that feed back into a result system that goes all the way into designs and plans at national level that are really migrant centers? And very, very lastly, I tried to put 2 points together because I think it would be good for us to go into a discussion. I was thinking about partnership and how real partnership is one of the lessons I think that we can pick from the pandemic and maybe crisis that has come after the pandemic. And when we talk about real partnerships, we know that governments won't walk the mile alone. Any challenge that there requires cities, regions, local authorities, but there is a group that they can leverage from, and that's the migrant and diaspora organization. There's a lot of agency in there. We've seen that come out very vibrantly during the pandemic, but in other spaces, migrant agency is really is something that governments, cities, municipalities, communities can leverage on in development. And we've also seen how that kind of agency, migrant and diaspora agency, has helped countries come out of humanitarian crisis. So that's where the real partnership is. But also, where does it start? And it starts at the dialogue table. So what's the space that's created to have this kind of dialogue? And I always come back to the room in the IMRF when we had the informal conversations in New York. So this was the informal multi-sector stakeholder, and a huge participation that's coming from the non-state actors, a bit like preaching to the converted. So how do we use these spaces that we have at that global platform to really engage in real dialogue and discussions about the things that we want to move? And that's where we really see the space being created. What's the environment around that? What's the intention to really engage with non-state actors? And you've got, various, here I'm talking about civil society, private sector, that we often forget. We're just talking about recruitment costs in a minute or so, recruitment agencies that are really essential partners that are often left out when we have to bring them onto that dialogue table because it's a difficult dialogue. Trade unions, where do we see the space for that? And so at JRFDT, we try as much as we can from that research angle to really engage, mainly through the Civil Society Action Committee, the People's Migration Challenge, which is a platform of civil society organizations, but also working together with international organizations from the UN system, outside of the UN system, and not forgetting where migration takes place, which is those migrant groups, those diaspora groups that really feed different systems with what kind of change they're looking to be gained from these global systems. So how we're really looking at things from the grassroots all the way up. An accountability framework, we really can't run away from it. I think we can learn from the VNR process and the approaches that we've seen when we even have civil society organizations being able to, to engage into these processes at that national level. And with this, I look forward for us to continuing this discussion today. But I also understand that we have an online discussion space where I guess we can take the conversation a bit further. ASG, thanks. I submit.
Thank you very much, Fadi. I think that you have asked more questions yet than I asked you, and that's very good. This will bring us more easily to the discussion, but I note, of course, the important contribution of the diaspora that you are highlighting and giving us examples, and the need to be real, basically, or say, look at the real people, look at the real issues, and even if the picture, the vision is not perfectly implemented, at least do something. I get your message. Thank you. And now with this, we have concluded our panelist first round and their thought-provoking presentations indeed. I'm afraid, as I was saying, that the two ambassadors we had in our panel had other commitments, and I think they have left us for now, but we still have other panelists with us. And also, we have a lot of interest in the audience, so we will have a lively debate. During the second part, and we have half an hour, more or less. We would like to identify indeed the concrete actions to strengthen the linkages between the GCM and the 2030 agenda, building on these presentations we heard, and on the findings, of course, of the review forum. And so we have proposed, and you have them in the concept note, 5 guiding questions. I'll go quickly through them. One is how can the Global Compact advance sustainable development at the national and local level? And what lessons we have learned from COVID-19 pandemic, how this can help us to speed up the recovery. The second question is about good practices. Are there examples of good practices to align reporting of GCM and SDGs? A third question is, again, how to align better, but this time local, national, regional level in implementing, in following up, in reviewing the progress. The fourth question goes to a theme many of you have already touched, and it is the measure progress indicators. What recommendations do you have for developing a limited set of indicators to measure progress in implementing the Global Compact, drawing from the global indicator framework of the SDGs as requested in the progress declaration? Of course, we have already a lot of indicators. How can we use them? Which ones are the most adaptable and appropriate for the Global Compact? And then final question, how can we best encourage the relevant subsidiary bodies of the Economic and Social Council in accordance with their respective mandates to contribute to the review of the implementation of the Global Compact as foreseen in the declaration? Now, I see there are already some yellow hands and some requests for the floor, which I have in my chat box. So I would like to go to the speakers. And in order to give everybody the opportunity to intervene, I would like to limit suggest you limit your interventions to 3 minutes each. So let me start. I have here in my list the Ambassador CDA, Ariel Peñaranda from the Philippines, then Fernando de Mora of the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the UN, followed by Sophie Van Assen of the Major Mechanism, a colleague of yours, Paddy, because it's Mr. Raji Bardouille of the GRFDT, and Sonia Plaza of Nomad, the World Bank, in this order. Can I then give the floor to Madam Peñaranda, please?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon.
Mr. Peñaranda, Ambassador.
Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. The Philippines congratulates the organizers of this side event and thanks the panelists very much for the insightful discussion. We firmly believe that a well-governed migration as outlined in the GCM can stimulate strong socioeconomic recovery and accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And it is therefore in the best interest of all countries to aim for safe, orderly, and regular migration. We are mindful of the importance of SDG 8, particularly target 8.8, and SDG 10, particularly targets 10.7 and target 10.C, as they relate to the implementation of the GMC. As early as 2016, in our first VNR presentation, we already highlighted the importance of migration. And the Philippines is now on our third VNR. As a GCM champion country, the Philippines has been committed to the implementation of the GCM and has productively engaged in the review forums. The Philippines chaired the first Asia-Pacific regional review of the implementation of the GCM and recently actively participated in the inaugural International Migration Review Forum. A key part of the GCM implementation in the Philippines is the incorporation of the GCM in our development plan. The enactment by the Philippines of the law establishing the Department of Migrant Workers is a component of the progressive realization of the 23 objectives of the GCM. The Philippines also established the Overseas Filipino Bank to ensure the delivery of financial products tailored to the requirements of overseas workers, especially remittance services. The Philippines has also been at the forefront of the resilient government response in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. We anchored our response in 5 Rs: repatriation, recovery, return, relief, and reintegration. We further expanded our response, which includes rollout of the vaccination program and issuance of the vaccination certificate, increased consular assistance, and mass repatriation, including financial support. We highly recognize the indispensable role of international cooperation in completely implementing the GCM and the SDGs. Thus, the Philippines partner with IOM, UN agencies, countries of destinations, CSOs, and other stakeholders. Member states, whether country of origin, transit, or destination, and stakeholders need to collaborate and keep working together towards a robust implementation of the GCM and the SDGs. And we acknowledge that there's still a lot to be done. The importance of measuring progress cannot be overstated. This was touched upon earlier by Deputy Director General Daniels and PR Maes of Luxembourg. I heard from Vice President Knudsen as well about this particular issue. Reliable and disaggregated data will enable evidence-based policies to implement the GCM. The question is, what is being done concretely to set up perhaps a workable and effective mechanism for us to come up with reliable and disaggregated data that will allow us to measure progress. Along the lines articulated by PR Lopez, budget allocation is very important. The Philippines is a member of the steering committee of the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund, and we believe that we can still make the fund better with greater support. We call on member states to support this trust fund so that migration-focused programs can be prioritized. To conclude, Madam Moderator, I just would like to reiterate the call for a meaningful, inclusive, and effective migration governance towards the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your statement. It's very relevant. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Mr. Fernando de la Mora of the Mexico Mission. Hi, Fernando.
Hello, Maria Francesca, and thank you very much to you, to the UN Network, all of the distinguished panelists for a very timely event. Indeed, the adoption by consensus of the first ever progress declaration of the IMRF is a landmark, and congratulations to the permanent representatives of Luxembourg and Bangladesh for really having put together an outstanding document that speaks to what was mentioned at the very beginning of this event. We're not going to achieve the 2030 Agenda until safe, orderly, and regular migration is part of our commitments to sustainable development. And in looking at some of the guiding questions, I think that the way forward is well laid out in the Progress Declaration. Having these indicators being reviewed by the UN Statistical Commission of these experts that know exactly how the SDG indicator framework can interact with the indicators of the GCM objectives is going to allow us all to speak the same language when it comes to the VNRs. And congratulations, of course, to the government of El Salvador for being able to effectively incorporate those into this peer learning exercise that is the VNRs. However, much has been said about these strengthening the links between the GCM and the SDGs, but also the functional commissions of ECOSOC and the relevant places in the General Assembly. And there, Mexico would make the point that VNRs are, of course, one space that should continue, but another has to do with the advocacy and public policy. And here we're very pleased that it's both governments and civil society with us at this side event to encourage the civil society colleagues in the room to not put the guard down with regards to the advocacy on implementation of the GCM. It's important that civil society continually approach governments at every level to share the data, the evidence, the work that you are doing on the front lines on implementation of the GCM, so that we can have a greater coherence between the political discourse that is said at New York and Geneva and on the ground. We think that's very important, and it falls very much in line with the whole of government approach and the whole of society approach that are guiding principles of the GCM. And to the governments in the room, to share with you very briefly that part of Mexico's experience on GCM implementation has come from having a stronger dialogue on migration policy and the GCM between different parts of the foreign ministry itself, being able to talk to our consular counterparts, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and how technology accelerated identification, biometric passports, and also consular cooperation for repatriation has been something very enriching that speaks to the whole of government approach. So again, thank you very much for organizing a very timely and good side event, and we look forward to mainstreaming safe, orderly, and regular migration in this and other high-level political forums to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your commitment and this contribution. In the meanwhile, I would like to recognize that the permanent mission of Morocco also requested the floor. So to invite our speakers to limit indeed themselves to the 3 minutes so that everybody has a chance, and then our panelists can also interact again. I would like to call now on Ms. Sophie Van Hassen of the Mayor's Mechanism, please.
Thank you so much, moderator, and hello from sunny Brussels. It's been really wonderful and as Fernando said, timely to listen in to the conversation today, and I think I've learned a lot so far. I'd like to share maybe a few perspectives from the local government side. So my name is Sophie Van Hazen. I'm the coordinator of the Mayor's Mechanism, which is co-steered by United Cities and Local Governments, the Mayor's Migration Council, and IOM. And it's been mentioned today already, local governments are really central to responding to the current but also future mobility challenges, as well as to grasp the real opportunities that migration brings. So I want to talk a little bit today about how we can make better use of this enormous potential at the local level. And bringing a little bit of concrete action at the IMRF, the Mayor's Mechanism, together with UNHCR, we launched a call to local action for migrants and refugees and delivered 70 local pledges to the coordinator of the UN network. So these actions simultaneously count as contributing to the Migration and Refugee Compacts, as well as to Agenda 2030. And let me just give you a few examples drawing from those actions that we received. The city of Boston in the US has established a Dreamers Fellowship, which offers undocumented youth leadership development learning and mentorship programs. So this action, for example, connects SDG 4 with several of the GCM objectives. The city of Bogota in Colombia has established a center for women migrants and refugees and their children to provide them with specific care they require. And this action connects SDG 5, again, with several of the GCM objectives. And then lastly, the city of Freetown in Sierra Leone and Milan in Italy lead the Africa-Europe Mayors Dialogue to really develop concrete city-to-city partnerships to change the narrative on migration. And this action is a good example of how SDG 17 connects with the GCM objectives. Of course, and I want to connect also to what Paddy said, those are all developed in really close partnership, mainly with civil society organizations, a lot of them migrant-led, but also the private sector and national governments as well. So I think these actions really show that at local level, in the delivery of services, regardless of status, the connections between these different global frameworks become real and tangible as well. So looking forward, and as a colleague from the Council of European Municipalities just this week, and the HLPF said, we have only 7 summers to go before 2030, and I would add only 2 more IMRFs. So there's a lot to be done, and time is maybe not so much on our side. So let's imagine what we can do to accelerate progress and to have local governments as one of the motors of this process. In the past IMRF, the reference to local governments as partners was really ample, but there's still very limited access for local governments to be part of the conversations. There's also very much a lack of access to capacity building and international financing for local governments, despite the fact that in the multi-partner trust fund, they are included as beneficiaries. So how can this SDG process, and specifically the localization process, inspire GCM implementation and vice versa? And I just want to add also that I don't have the answers, but I can help maybe fine-tune some of the questions that we ask. So I have 3. So the first one would be on local reviews. From 2020 to 2022, the total number of voluntary local reviews has tripled. So from 40 in 2020 to more than 150 this year. So this number represents a total of 1.2 billion people. So these voluntary local reviews are wins at many levels. They provide a very strong impetus to strengthen dialogue between local and national governments. And they are also really crucial to foster ownership of Agenda 2030 with local governments. So how can we use this experience in GCM implementation? These local reviews are generally really quite weak on migration issues. So the task is really ahead to build the capacity with local governments to integrate GCM implementation into this process. And our call to local action can help us do that. And I think we've also heard a lot of promising examples of how national governments are actually doing that. It will also be important to discuss how the UN can support us in this work. But then more at the national level, can this local review experience inspire GCM coordination at national level? And if so, are there any GCM champion countries or other member states that would want to lead, this whole of government conversation towards the next IMRF? Secondly, on indicators, I think to measure impact, the local level will be key to measure. And there's a wealth of indicator frameworks out there already. And I see you would want me to wrap up. So let me just jump straight to my last point with regards to more inclusive and structured engagement with local governments. In the HLPF, there is structured engagement, which happens through the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments. And there is a dedicated local government forum within the HLPF for exchange. So I just want to add, maybe we can learn from that. And what would it mean to replicate this for the next IMRF? And how can we use the regional reviews as a testing ground for this? So really looking forward to continue the conversation on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you interpreted my signalization very well, Sophie. Thank you for wrapping up. We have another speaker from the Permanent Mission of Portugal that I recognize now. And this means we have 4 more interventions from the floor. And really you have to bear with me, be very concise so we can give the panelists the opportunity to come back. I won't do it in 2 rounds as I had initially imagined because we don't have that time, but I'm very glad to have all this participation. So let me give the floor to next. We said Rej Bardui of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, who put in the chat, in fact, a question about inclusion at national level. So I guess this is your question, basically. Please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to all those who have so far spoken. And in the interest of time, I'll be very brief. 1, I think before we talk about implementation, there has to be sensitization of both frameworks. I'm not assuming that they are not being sent. The implementing agencies or partners have not been sensitized. That's at the national. Local, national, regional, I'm not talking about the international. And it seems that most of the time when we talk, the emphasis is more at the international level, what they're doing, what they're not doing. My concern is how much the implementers at the national, local, regional level know these 2 initiatives. The implementers, whether they are at the municipal level or whether they are at the national level. With us, GRFDT, we have offered 2 programs on the GCM objectives in 2 consecutive years. Okay, not going to talk about it. But so I think this, to me, is a first step to then talking about who's going to implement, these are the implementing, these are the indicators and so on. We're all assuming that these things are cooked up so nicely and the national capacities in different regions of the world is very different. So you take certain regions which are less, you know, there are other regions who may be a little bit more advanced. And there's much to learn from them, but I think we shouldn't really underestimate that. Secondly, I think we are talking about whole of society, whole of government approach and so on. What sort of provision governments at the national level are making or have made to bring in various partners? Firstly, to recognize that they are partners. So we need to do, for me, it is important. What is the reaction of bringing in everyone? And in New York, yes, we have the whole of the government, whole of the society approach. How do you include them? How much value, whether it's migrants or whether it's local councils or whether it is NGOs or educational institutions. And it's only then you see who is able to do what and how to tap that capacity. Rather, I mean, that will be my contribution. And in the interest of time, I think I'll just stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for bearing with us about the time. And now I have in my list, yes, Ms. Sonia Plaza of Nomad, the World Bank. Sonia, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the great presentations and interventions. I'm going to try to provoke a little bit the audience. First of all, let's go back when we start working even to include in 2015 the SDG migration related indicator, we were successful. So now my question is now, why we have to reinvent the wheel? We already have those indicators, okay, migration related indicators. Those indicators that were put in there for policy coherence should be incorporated on the Global Compact on Migration indicators to review those ones. Example, Paddy talked about the recruitment agencies. Indicator 10.7.1 is key, is how to reduce the recruitment cost. Nobody's looking at that. It's more blah, 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 10.7, you safe orderly. Everybody say, everybody safe orderly. But what we are seeing in reality when we did our site event at the IMRF, recruitment costs are increasing, even worse. And even the recruiting agencies and the firms don't want to pay even the quarantine, the test, everything. So this indicator should stay. And then as well as the 10.C.1, reducing remittances costs, as well as the volume of the remittances. So for me, for policy coherence, my suggestion will be that those indicators that are already in the SDGs stay. That has been also verified by the UN Statistics Office. That's one. Second one, in terms of the local measures, Nomad, we organized in 2013 and the high-level dialogue, the first meeting of the local participation for the first time measures. 2015, it was the Migration Forum on Development, Major Forum on Development was on the 2015 indicators. And we were looking at that agenda, how we can implement at the local level. It will be great now that we see how much of that it has been implemented or not, because that was that initiative. So I will encourage the mayoral mechanism to see how much progress on the SDGs at the local level. And finally, on the diaspora, 13 years ago, the bank organized a big event. I don't know how many people on diaspora. And the same issues are being treated right now. I think that now the diaspora have to move to action, okay? So I agree with you, they have to participate, but now it's really action that they can do. For example, how we rebuild back better with the vaccines. We have a lot of skills. So for me, we'll be more looking into the action and participate. Thank you very much. And the World Bank is the host, the cost custodian of several of these migration-related indicators, and we are moving to capture that data to support all the countries. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sonia. And indeed, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. That's good that you remind us that some indicators are there and you are Nomad doing it for a long time now. I have to, yes, acknowledge the fact that the minister, that the ambassador, sorry, of El Salvador had to leave, and we knew that, and I regret very much, but we understand very well. Luckily, she left the minister counselor, Mayra Sorto, with us, so we can have the benefit of her presence. Now we have the last two speakers, Mr. Salim Yousfi from the Permanent Mission of Morocco. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and I promise I will try to be very brief in my general remarks. So, as we all know, both a milestone and new beginning, the first edition of the IMRF was above all an opportunity to assess the effectiveness of the Marrakesh Compact as a guiding principle of our action. Morocco has presented during the first IMRF many pledges that address national needs in line with our international commitments. They are all realistic, ambitious, multi-stakeholder, pan-societal, and pan-governmental. First, migration will be included for the first time in the national census to be conducted in 2024. A model on international migration will be integrated into the Permanent National Employment Survey. We're still monitoring the integration of the human rights dimension in policies related to migration. We will implement programs with IOM and other UN agencies to address the impact of climate change on migration and inclusion. We will provide migration-related training to French-speaking, Arab, and African countries in any language. So my country's contribution to the first IMRF had the ambitions of setting the bar higher in the series of the upcoming reviews forum. Looking ahead to the IMRF 2026, Morocco welcomes the pledge formula as a powerful and effective tool, setting high standards for the GCM implementation during the upcoming few years. Moreover, we keep working permanently on creating conditions for migrants and diaspora to fully contribute to sustainable development through the implementation of several projects aimed at strengthening the support of migrants residing in Morocco in terms of self-employment. The development of South-South cooperation programs allows for economic and social co-development in the migrants' countries of origin, and the conclusion of several partnerships promoting the involvement of Moroccan living abroad in technology transfer and expertise, particularly in the areas of environment and renewable energy, support for cooperatives, health, and higher education. That's all for me, Madam, and thank you.
Thank you for sharing the Moroccan vision and the brevity too. And our last speaker from the Mission of Portugal, Delegate Alfonso Lages, please.
Thank you, ASG Spatolisano. Good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you can hear me. I'll keep my camera off as I have an unstable connection at the moment. But I just wanted to make a couple of very brief reflections on the subject we are dealing with today. So the first thing, as has of course been noted by other speakers, is that the GCM and the 2030 agenda strongly reinforce each other, and that some of the mandates that we have adopted in the IMRF political declaration a couple of months ago will contribute to the acceleration of the 2030 agenda by simply contributing to the implementation of the GCM. The indicators have been mentioned. They are a good example of it. Of course, these indicators have to use the work that has already been done. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but indeed we do need indicators that cover the whole of the GCM objectives. And another example is the invitation to the UNNM coordinator, the DG of IOM, to intervene in the HLPF has happened for the first time this year. A third example is, of course, the linkages between the VNRs. Both the VNRs for the GCM, which have begun happening over the last couple of years and being submitted by member states, and of course, the more well-established VNRs that exist for the 2030 agenda. And in that sense, the VNR lab that was organized last year on how to integrate migration in the Agenda 2030 VNRs was a very useful initiative. But ultimately, and this is the last point that I want to make, ultimately, it really depends on all of stakeholders, on local governments, on civil society, and of course on us, the member states, to do more and to keep migration where it belongs at the HLPF every year by organizing side events, by including migration in our statements, by including negotiated language on migration in the HLPF. And I believe there is still some room for improvement in the years to come. And so I hope that at next year's HLPF, after an HLPF last year, which was welcomed for being the best HLPF yet for migration, I hope that next year we can resume that trend, building on the first IMRF. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have with this concluded the list of our speakers, and I am delighted we have a couple of minutes at least to give the floor back to our two panelists, Rauda Jawani and Paddy Sianga-Knudsen, for some concluding remarks. Who wants to do first? Paddy?
I think sometimes it's better to conclude with the questions that we've been left with, and responding and the response that we have to give to them in our individual spaces. I think this is the tough work that we have in front of us. I think this conversation and discussion here has been very important in terms of kind of bringing different elements together. I think it's very clear that, you know, the SDG monitoring indicators that are there, you know, basically asking ourselves, what do we think is wrong with them? You know, or, you know, how useful can they be in terms of how we can measure progress in relation to the GCM, but then also, you know, how do we measure success as well? I think it's one of the questions, I think, at least even in the civil society space, that we've been asking ourselves, but who's measuring it? I think there's also been some very important references to that local level and the localization part of it. You know, when we talk about the space in which the reviews are taking place, how do we really open up these spaces? And it was very interesting to hear from the mayor's mechanism in terms of some of these, but also centering it back again to where the action happens and with the local governments and the kind of roles that they have to play. It's also been very interesting to re-emphasize again on the use of data. And I think, you know, monitoring frameworks in any case need to be fed with some kind of data. And we're already saying that we don't have enough data. So one wonders, as we are walking along, are we saying we're just, you know, are we just going around, you know, are we just going around the fences and not really realizing the value of what we have in front of us in terms of the different spaces that data is available, and understanding how we can have a mechanism of approaching the data that's available and using this. And indeed, I think there are some spaces that we need to be very conscious about when we talk about disaggregation, and make sure that we're very representative when we talk about migrants and diaspora. And I think one of the other things, you know, coming back again to the space of championing, you know, we really need to move to a space where we know that, you know, champion countries are those that really dare to make a difference in trying times. And we're just not moving the regular sticks along. And taking that kind of courage, I think, takes a concerted effort. It takes a lot of effort. It's this whole of society approach that we've been talking about that supports ambitions that are set up in frameworks such as the GCM. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these words. And now closing remarks from Rauda Jawani, Tunisia, please. Again.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I really, it's my pleasure to be with you here to exchange with different colleagues here about how to implement GCM and SDGs. Of course, I want to highlight something which is deal with contextualization or domestication. It's very, very important, because as we know, SDGs are universal goals, but we have to take into account the national context, the national priorities. That's why how to align SDGs and national priorities is very, very important. And of course, the ownership at the national level. It's a very, very important that in national level we have to have this as a national objective, as national goals, and we have to align our national objectives and national priorities to be in a phase with Global Compact, GCM, and SDGs, of course. And of course, I like very much what said Paddy about the national dialogue and huge dialogue according to migration. We have to seize every opportunity to talk about migration and to integrate the population which is disabled at the same time. We have to integrate migrants in this dialogue, not only these workers in administration or other structures at the national level, but of course we have to integrate, we have to hear the voice of migrants. And this is very, very important, I think. And of course, indicators, how to measure, and of course, we, as Paddy said, that's right, we have a lot of indicators that we don't use them with the relevant methods. That's why we have to use what we are as an indicator to facilitate implementation of SDGs and of course GCM. And thank you very much. Another one. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. This was a very informative and very interesting exchange we had. And we did hear from very different, viewpoints, but I think all of you have demonstrated the commitment of the different actors in this area. So I am hopeful and look forward to the implementation of these various agendas. I would like to thank you, panelists, but also those who have so actively contributed to this debate. And of course, DESA is grateful to the IOM and the UNDP for joining us in organizing this event. One last important reminder is that the Migration Network Hub has created a dedicated discussion space online, and so the discussion can continue and feed into our further work. And we have eaten 5 minutes of the time of the next session, but now I am glad to hand over the meeting to Mr. Luca Renda, the head of the Recovery Solutions and Human Mobility Unit in UNDP, indeed, Crisis Bureau, for some reflections and closing remarks. Luca.
Thank you very much, ASG Francesca. It is really a pleasure to be with all of you today. It has been a really excellent discussion. I want to thank all the colleagues who have put together the event and all the panelists, of course. I will try to limit my remarks to some very key points that I have collected. Let's say I've noted during the discussion. I've taken plenty of notes, of course, and this discussion will give, especially as the agencies who are in the UN Network on Migration, that those who form part of the executive committee of the UN Network on Migration, a lot of indication, a lot of directives on where to steer our work. And we are actually going towards a reflection in the next couple of months, a kind of a retreat. And then we will be discussing a work plan to be approved by our principal in October. So all of these issues that have been discussed today and all of recommendation and suggestion will be very important for us. I would say, the first point I want to stress is that this was made by everybody, which is this unequivocal link between the goals, the objectives of the GCM and the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. So that was reiterated, and I think it's very fitting that we're having this event today, which is the last day of the HLPF, during which we have undertaken a reflection on our progress on SDGs, but really understanding that the goals enshrined in the GCM, the Global Compact on Migration, towards safe, orderly, and regular migration are indispensable to achieve the SDGs. And this recognition of migrants, and I like the term used by the DDG IM as this mega trend, but it is a mega trend that contributes to sustainable development. It has done so for centuries, I would say, for millennia, and it continues to do so in our globalized world. But it is really important, and I want to stress and particularly highlight and express, congratulations again to the facilitator of the Progress Declaration, the Ambassador of Luxembourg and Bangladesh. It was not easy, and those of us who were involved in those negotiations know. And but the energy that was there at the IMRF was clear. There is, it was a milestone, as was said, in terms of multilateral collaboration towards to common, to address collectively what is a common issue, a common issue to be managed properly, and the importance of international collaboration to do so. One other point that I want to stress is this idea of government ownership and government leadership. And I hear especially the intervention of the ambassador of El Salvador and Rauda Joani from Tunisia about the first of all, the highest level of engagement. This works only if SDGs and the GCM are owned at the highest level of engagement, be there the president or prime minister, whatever form exists, and then it translated in a whole of government approach, in an alignment with national plans and priority and vision. And it is, I want to stress this, very important, also translated into a budgetary allocation. Too often we see national plans and strategy that they're not reflected in budgetary allocation. So that the fact that both, and I would say, speakers that intervened later stressed the fact that there is then a reflection in budgetary allocation and proper legislation. And also it was stressed the idea that this is not just a national government priority, but this is also translated at the level of sectoral, of course, ministry, but also at the local level, at the regional level, at the municipal level. And important here, the contribution of the colleague from the mayor mechanism as well. It was another point, of course, the role of civil society, the importance of having inclusive, participatory processes be there in the formulation of policies, but also, for example, in the formulation of national plans, or even in the formulation of VNRs, and to make the voice of migrants heard, the voice of diasporas, the voice of also, wasn't really mentioned, but academia, private sector, other members of the society, this idea that there is a whole of society approach involved in this. Another point that I want to mention is that the pandemic really taught us a lot of lessons, and I particularly appreciate here the intervention of Paddy, that it really stressed how, it really reminded us of the role that migrants play, how essential they are in our society, but also the importance of, first of all, being prepared, right? We were not prepared enough, and this is not, it's coming again. It's probably, we see now other phenomenon, global, or local phenomenon that have global impacts, unfortunately, with the war in Ukraine, for example. So we need to be prepared, and we have particular tools like social protection mechanisms that are essentially, that are really key as safety nets when crises happen, and remittances in a sense can play that role, in crisis. And it's good to see that all in all, remittances didn't take a big dip. Actually, they didn't take a dip during the pandemic. Although in localized circumstances they did, but as a global average they didn't. And to stress the idea of migrants as agents of sustainable development. Another point is the issue of data. It was mentioned by everybody. This idea that we have to work towards some set of indicators. This is actually a call that was made in the Progress Declaration. It was actually a call to the SG. Within the UN Network on Migration, we are establishing a working group on this. some people say this will give teeth to the global compact in terms of being able to monitor progress, right? Because so far we don't have a real mechanism to monitor progress in a quantitative manner. So having a set of data that uses SDG integration, and maybe we find a few select others that are useful, I think it's important, is a call that was made by many. And finally, the role of champion countries, the role of champion initiative, the role of this is a global effort. This is this agenda of the SDG, of the global compact migration, are galvanizing effort at every level. But some, I would say, it is important to recognize that some countries are taking this role of champions, and they're playing a really important role to keep that political momentum. And I want to stress also here that it's good to see also another forum like the GFMD, the Global Forum on Migration and Development, now being revamped, revitalized, and starting its work again. So for us, UN Network Migration from UNDP, of course, renewing our commitment, redoubling our efforts. Again, reminder of the discussion space that exists in UN Network Migration for people to contribute and to exchange ideas. And with that, I think we can close the event. Wishing you all the best, happy weekend, and those of you who travel for the HLPF, safe journey back home. Back to you, ASG Francesca.
Thank you very much. These were very, very nice closing remarks, and I want to acknowledge that and acknowledge the participation of all these incredible participants in a very interesting side event. Thank you very much. The event is closed.